I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside, it's so comfortable, and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off road. The guy managed the group. He was like, "What are you doing in this beautiful car?" I'm like, "I'm going off road." He's like, "Are you sure? Because you can use one of ours." And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, "No, no, 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 we're going to do this." And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability as well as its robust interior are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
These days, we're all investors, trying to be smart with our money despite our worst impulses. But at iShares, we believe that deep down inside of every investor is a better investor. One that's just waiting to be let out. Explore iShares ETFs and insights and let your best investor out. Visit iShares.com for more information.
I am obsessed with not losing any of my brain ability as I get older. And I'm also really nervous about dementia and Alzheimer's. My grandmother had Alzheimer's. In fact, I would like my brain to be smarter as I get older, if such a thing's possible. So I had on neuroscientist Dr. Marc Milstein, who just wrote a book, The Age-Proof Brain, New Strategies to Improve Memory, Protect Immunity, and Fight Off Dementia. It's a great book, great conversation. Here we go.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show.
In the book, The Age-Proof Brain, you offer solutions to maybe avoid dementia. I didn't know you could avoid things or postpone things like Alzheimer's or dementia.
Yeah, so that's what we're seeing, is that it's not destiny in a vast majority of cases, and that we have things that we can do. I like to say in the book, little things, because nobody wants to make major changes. So how do we do little things that can protect our brain and really also get the best out of it each day? And so we do see that we can lower risk of dementia anywhere from 30 to 60%. I know that's a big range, but that's where the studies are showing us. And it's about some lifestyle factors.
And I didn't know this either, that dementia is what Alzheimer's causes, and other things cause dementia too. But that's like sort of the end goal of Alzheimer's is dementia. I thought maybe it was like, oh, everybody gets a little bit of dementia, but some people get it really serious with Alzheimer's. So I really didn't know too well all the lingo there.
Yeah, it's a common misconception. And part of it is because for years, the terms were used interchangeably. So it was just used in the same manner. But now we really separate them and say that dementia is symptoms, the symptoms of memory loss, which, as you said, can be caused by many, many different things. It could be, injuries. It could be other conditions. Alzheimer's is one specific condition that causes the symptoms of memory loss. So it's a very specific pathology or things that are happening in the brain that cause that memory loss. It's the most common cause of dementia, so it's critically important we talk about it.
Yeah, and so far it seems they don't really know for sure what causes Alzheimer's. Like you mentioned in the book, for instance, the plaque that builds up in the neurons, but you also mentioned tangles that build up inside the brain cells. And I didn't know that there were. I always thought it was the plaque stuff, but recent studies have shown that drugs that cure the plaque stuff don't really work on Alzheimer's as well as people thought they would.
Yeah, so it's what we're seeing is happening is it's multiple factors. I like to say it's like the straw that breaks the camel's back. It's a mix of this waste, plaques, tangles. It's also metabolism, so the brain's not using sugar like it used to. It's inflammation, so that the immune system is attacking the brain, and we believe it's just this basically compounding effects, and they build up over time. And so, just dealing with the plaques or the tangles is probably not enough. It might show some benefits. There's some trials going on right now where we're seeing some help, but where we saw a lot of benefit in cancer treatments is when it was a cocktail of medications that went after multiple underlying issues. And the evidence is suggesting it's going to be the same thing with Alzheimer's.
You also mentioned like there are people who have a ton of plaque, a ton of tangles. They're over the age of
Yeah.
100 and they're doing crossword puzzles every day and skiing or
Right.
whatever. And so they don't even, so they have all this evidence that they should have Alzheimer's or dementia, but they don't. So that also indicates there's things we
Right.
don't understand or know about ultimately what's causing dementia.
Yeah, so Alzheimer's induced a dementia, specifically, it's not just the plaques. And that is why we believe those medications alone are not as successful as we thought they would have been, and that it's inflammation, the immune system attacking the brain. It's the loss of the ability to use sugar, and also some other factors that we just don't know. So it's not just one thing. And although that seems more complex, it actually gives us hope because it means that there are multiple avenues that we can pursue to lessen the risk and develop better therapeutics and treatments.
So I guess I want to hear about what some of those lifestyle changes are, and one thing I was thinking
Yeah.
is you have this one story of a nun who's 102 years old who's solving crossword puzzles every
Right.
day. She's smart, she's quick-witted, and then when she dies, she's the example you use to show she had a lot of plaque and a lot of tangles, all the things that would indicate in the brain she should have dementia, but she didn't. I'm wondering if she had such a simple lifestyle, like basically her whole lifestyle was regimented for her being a nun, and it's a very, and I'm sure in her older ages she didn't have as many responsibilities. I bet when you have like a zero stress life, that probably helps.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that because what we see is that it's actually some amount of stress is actually quite good for the brain. If we look at we kind of think of the brain like a car. Like if you don't drive it and you leave it in the garage, it falls apart. And if you overdrive it, it falls apart. So we actually see that some amount of stress actually helps memory, helps let the brain know that the brain needs to keep functioning and needs to keep working. It's that cortisol, that stress hormone in a burst. It's like primes the brain cells, helps them, keeps them healthy, keeps them youthful. But if it's too much too often, if it's never ending or we can't take a break from it or it's overwhelming, that's when we see damage to brain cells and damage to memory. So we're actually thinking about stress in a bit of a different way, which is we want engagement, we want things we want to get done. We just don't want it to be overwhelming or too much too often.
So I'm curious about all these things, like what one can do for, and you mentioned a lot of lifestyle habit changes that
Yeah.
are fairly easy to do that could reduce or eliminate or at least help with dementia, Alzheimer's stuff. But I'm also curious about age-related decline, as I mentioned before, as related to someone like me, someone over the age of 50 who, in a very visceral way, it's not like I have dementia or senility or anything like that. I'm not, I don't have that, but I could see the difference between myself in my 20s. And I'm sure a lot of people experience that when they're in their 50s.
Yeah. So starting at the age of 40, actually, the brain starts to shrink about 5% about every 10 years. And so that shrinking can have an impact on memory, focus, productivity, day-to-day ability to just sort of get things done at the same rate or productivity level as previously. But as you mentioned, we see that there are things that we can do not only to slow that down, but also be aware that we want to say that there's certain things that are gonna decline, maybe the speed of calculations, for example, but we can increase our ability to have wisdom or perspective. So there is a balance there. But in overall, what we see is that we can take care of the brain. There are going to be some skills that might get not as robust, not as strong, but we can do things to keep our brain working better, longer. And also, on the other hand, there's evidence that when people do the things where I think we're going to talk about, that even people in their 60s, 70s, 80s, when they optimize their sleep, manage their stress, think about the things they're eating, that their ability of their processing speed of their brain does go up, their ability to run their day goes up, their ability to score on tests goes up. So we do have evidence that these interventions can be powerful. At the same time, as we get older, we do have to be aware that things can slow down. And if it's happening here or there, that can be normal. But if it's happening at an increased rate or increased frequency, or we're seeing major changes, we actually want to get the message out that we don't want to say that that's just a normal part of aging, because we see that there are things we can do to slow it down. So we want to be on top of it and not just say, oh, that's just part of the aging process. Because as we get into our 60s, what we're seeing is something that's much more common than we thought, called mild cognitive impairment, which is people starting to not have dementia, where it's the inability to get through the day based upon memory issues, but there's some significant memory issues. And in the past, people said, oh, that's just the aging process. Well, now we know that shouldn't be happening. So we want to make some distinctions about if things are getting significantly worse, we're noting any changes, we want to get on top of it because we see that we can make improvements.
But it sounds like it is in part the aging process. Like you said, the brain gets smaller, which I want to ask you about. So you have to do these lifestyle changes. In your 20s, you don't have to do the lifestyle changes. Maybe you're not living optimally for your brain, but you could kind of have a laissez-faire attitude towards your brain health because your brain's still large. And then when you're older, you kind of have to do these things. Like one of the first things I did after reading your book was go immediately to the dentist and, check on gingivitis and things like that. Because that's like this chronic inflammation. And you mentioned how inflammation affects the brain. And I had some, so I had to do like a cleaning and antibiotics and hopefully that will help. But what you're saying is basically that even if one is experiencing some decline, we don't really know what their potential is until they start, adjusting to these lifestyle changes.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that, I'm glad that you made that step, taking the information and making the action step. That's great. Because exactly what you're saying is that inflammation that seems so minor or so insignificant can spread to the brain and cause an inflammation or the immune system attacking the brain. And also what you're saying is true. When we're in our, teens or 20s, getting a good night's sleep is good. It's beneficial. And we see people perform better, in athletics if they get a good night's sleep, but there's more of a leeway. There's more of a buffer. And then as we get older, there's less of a buffer. And I think we don't need scientific studies to show us that. We just feel that as we get older, that, what used to be something you could get away with is harder to get away with as you get older.
Yeah. So, so a lot of people listening to this, they might not be in their 70s or 80s, but they might be caring for someone who is, or they also might be younger and they like to keep optimal brain health, or they might be like me, like somewhere in the middle. And why does the brain shrink, first of all? Like what is shrinking? Is it one part of the brain or is it the entire brain?
Essentially overall. Part of it is that as we get older, this waste that builds up in the brain becomes harder to get rid of. And there's several reasons for that. The older that we get, we're not sleeping as well as we used to. And so when we sleep at night, we're actually squeezing trash and waste out of the brain and essentially washing it away through something we call basically the brainwash process. So when that trash builds up, it can damage brain cells and cause them to shrink. That's one thing that can be happening. Also, as we get older, part of our aging process is that our immune system doesn't work as well. And so we're not as good often as fighting off viruses or having our immune system understand when it's time to take a break, that, don't attack the joints, don't attack the heart, don't attack the gut, don't attack the brain. And so by the immune system essentially thinking of it like an army attacking the brain, that can shrink the brain as well. So the hopeful side of all this is that we see that the lifestyle factors that we're talking about here, optimizing your sleep, thinking about inflammation, thinking about your dental health, these things can keep basically aspects of your brain healthier by alleviating or minimizing those factors that can do the damage.
And I wonder, like, let's say sleep. That's something that you could, treat medically. Like I could take a sleeping pill, for instance, or melatonin. And is it cheating? Does it not work if I use artificial means to sleep?
Well, we see that natural sleep is best. So things to think about are that the over-the-counter sleep aids, for example, or the people say they'll take an allergy pill, for example, that has the side effect that can make you feel drowsy. That's an area where, you can feel like, oh, I'm doing something helpful for my brain because I'm going to be getting more sleep. But we realize that it's not just the number of hours of sleep that you're getting, it's how effective and the quality of that sleep. And so if we go back to that idea of that washing process, for example, with the over-the-counter sleep aids, we see that people who use those long-term, on average, develop memory issues earlier. And we believe part of what's happening, there's two main things that are happening there. One is that we believe that these over-the-counter sleep aids or these drowsy-inducing medications like allergy pills that people often use to fall asleep, they don't allow the brain to go through that washing process. So there's too much of this waste left over. And if you just think of your brain like a house or an apartment, there's too much trash or garbage around. It's hard to find things, hard to focus, hard to be productive. So we want to make sure that each night we're getting that brain washing, brain cleansing sleep. And the other thing is that we realize that if we're turning to these things, these solutions, for example, the over-the-counter sleep aids, they have something in them called anticholinergic. They minimize a compound in the brain that's just critical for memory. So the science is very sound that we see that these solutions are not things we want to turn to. And instead, we've learned so much about how the brain works that we want to turn to those things in terms of optimizing our sleep. And we can talk about some of those things if you'd like how do you get the good night's sleep without turning to the sleeping aid?
Yeah, no, that is interesting. So Arianna Huffington a long time ago wrote a book about sleep and how she suffered from lack of sleep and then really did some research on this and wrote a book about it. And I had her on the podcast to talk about it, but that was a long time ago. Like, what are one or two suggestions? And I admit to sometimes using aids to sleep.
Yeah. I mean, it's when we hear about how important sleep is, it's so easy to turn to things that we think are helping, but they're not helpful. So instead, one of the most powerful tips is not anything you're doing while you're sleeping or before bed, but it's in the morning. And there's this discovery that won the Nobel Prize, essentially, that there's a brain clock in your head. There's like a little tiny clump of brain cells that's kind of like a countdown timer that helps you fall asleep at night and helps you essentially get a better night's sleep. And you start the countdown in the morning by getting outside in the presence of natural light. The studies suggest about 10 minutes within about a half hour of getting up. And this brain clock essentially starts the countdown in the morning that's going to help you fall asleep at night. So it sounds really simple, but a lot of us either work from home or we jump in a car or a public transportation, we go to work, we go to an office. We're just missing out on morning light. And something so small, so something that seems like so silly, but it's in our modern world, we can overlook it. And so just, when you wake up in the morning, take a walk the dog, check the mail, go to the front yard, the backyard, a balcony, let your brain get that morning light. That's really powerful. It's become a new field called chronobiology. We realize this brain clock regulates sleep, mood, metabolism. Our brain is tuned to the light and dark cycles, and sometimes we can easily overlook that. So I would say that something very powerful is try a little bit more morning light as something that can help you sleep that night.
And is it true that you have to sleep 8 straight hours? Like, can I sleep 4 hours, get up for a while, and then sleep 4 hours? Or does it have to be like, does the washing occur if it's the sleep's continuous?
Yeah, so the washing, and that's another thing is I hope that nobody hears this podcast and says they're going to wake up at 2 a.m. and to say, "No, I'm not getting my brain washed. I'm more stressed than ever." I wish I didn't hear about this. So just to reiterate or to highlight some key points is that you sleep in about a 90-minute cycle, and within that 90 minutes you have a brain wash, and then at the end of the 90-minute cycle you're dreaming, and you're basically paralyzed from the neck down, so you don't act out your dreams. And at the end of the 90 minutes, you actually wake up. And you actually move a little. It's actually normal. So really an important message for people is it's okay to wake up throughout the night. You actually wake up every 90 minutes, about every 90 minutes. You're not conscious of all those awakenings, but it's okay to wake up. It's normal. It's part of the process. We're really not meant to just get in bed and stay asleep. Some people are not aware of the wake up, so they feel like they're sleeping, a certain number of hours straight, but you actually do wake up. It's okay to wake up. If you wake up tonight, remind yourself you just had a brain wash in that cycle. We just want to have several of these washes throughout the night to optimize that cleaning process. But by no means do you have to have this feeling like I'm laying in bed, I go to sleep, and I just wake up a certain number of hours later, and there was no disruption throughout the night.
And you also mentioned the role of like anxiety and depression on future dementia. Like why? Like anxiety is kind of and I think related to this is you mentioned how this generation we're seeing more instances of dementia than ever. And my initial instinct was, is that because people are living longer in general? But I don't think that's it. I think maybe we're more stressed in our daily lives.
Yeah. So part of it is that we're living longer. That's a piece of the puzzle. But it's also the factors of all these underlying conditions. There's some environmental factors that we believe are happening, toxins in our environment, and also things that we're still learning about. But when we talk about anxiety and depression, what we do see, and this actually just came out this year, this study that found that if anxiety and depression are not treated, if they're not managed, if they're not treated effectively, they increase the risk of dementia years down the road. So individuals who have unmanaged anxiety or depression, if you follow them, what you see happens is that on average, they lose their memory about 5 years earlier than individuals that don't have those conditions. And so what we believe is happening is those conditions, anxiety, depression, they can have an inflammatory component too. In some cases, those individuals are not sleeping as well, and they're impacting some of the lifestyle factors that we're talking about as well. So really the message is that our mental health today is impacting our long-term brain health down the road. But the hopeful side of this is that the things that we're talking about, optimizing sleep, thinking about things that we're eating, all these intervention, little lifestyle things, they're important for mental health today, and they're important for brain health down the road. So it's not like we have to do a whole new set of things. They can be beneficial for both.
Yeah, and you have a list of foods in one chapter towards the end that are good for the brain. So I'll let people just find that in the book. One question I have about like certain vitamins, you mentioned vitamin D, is I've talked to different scientists about vitamin D and vitamin C, and some people just don't believe that they work at all. Some people think that it doesn't get absorbed into the body correctly. Like, is there, and then there's companies that will come over your house and intravenously with an IV give you all the vitamins you need. And so, what's the best way to take like vitamin D, for instance, other than I get it's sunlight, but in terms of supplements and food?
Yeah, we can take supplements and put them all in the same category, which is lots of conflicting data. And so really, when we see things that are this conflicting, we basically break it down this way, that people once or twice a year, just like you went out and went to the dentist, that was a really great step, is once or twice a year, go to the doctor and just get a blood test and test for these things, the things that supplements would be dealing with. And if anything is deficient, first try to deal with it with food, because we see that, as you said, the food absorbs better than these supplements. We see that clearly. If food is not alleviating the issue, then supplements can be used, but we want to use them in a way that somebody's coming back, a year, 6 months or a year later, because vitamin D is the perfect example of something where it's in the news and people, the message seems to be that everybody needs more vitamin D. Well, if you need it, if you're not getting enough, that's true. But if you're taking too much of it, that can also cause issues with memory and cause issues with cognition. So what we realize is that overdosing on these things is a problem too. So really, we want people to just take that extra step and make sure that they need it. And if they need it, take it, but not be overdosing on it.
Wow. So I think I've been, when COVID started, I started taking a lot of all these things like vitamin D, zinc, magnesium, vitamin C. I wonder if I've been like doing too much. Like I'll take 10,000 IUs, for instance, of vitamin D. Do you think that's too much?
It depends upon somebody's absorption, but I would say that get that blood test, see where you are. And if you're at the levels too high in the range, then, too much of any of these things that we know these mega doses that, were popular quite a few years ago can be in the category of where it can be doing more harm than good. So we want to be in the normal ranges. So, I keep coming back to it, but I'm just so impressed you went to the dentist. You actually, you made that step.
I'll get my blood done.
Yeah, just get that once or twice a year physical blood work. And if anything is too low, address it with food. If that's not working, supplements. If something's too high, then think about cutting some things back for sure.
You know what I love about fantasy sports is that even though I'm not going to be a great basketball player or a baseball player or a football player or whatever, I feel like I get to participate and make decisions and use my knowledge of these different leagues or these different sports to compete. So it's like I can pick my team or I can pick my favorite players, and I could use my knowledge to make predictions and maybe even make money. So with the basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League on Prize Picks. This is a league created specifically for combo projections that include two or more players from different sports or leagues. Want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz, who's also been a guest on this podcast, and I've been a guest on his? You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries for some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Look, Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. What? So I love playing it. I love anywhere where I can use analytical ability with my interests to demonstrate some skill and maybe make some money. And I like the game-like aspect. I do wish they had chess as a category on prizepicks.com, but I'll settle for what they've got. Maybe I should make my own fantasy chess league. But in any case, I love Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/James. Use code James for a first deposit match up to $100. That's the easiest $100 you're ever going to make. So that's prizepicks.com/James and use code James. Daily fantasy sports made easy. The future of learning is definitely online. Like, it's such BS that you have to spend $200,000 or take $200,000 in loans and go to some fancy school when it's useless. It doesn't guarantee you a job. Most employers, including me, do not care about degrees or grades or anything like that. We want to care that you love what you're doing, that you know what you're doing, in some cases that you have experience or that you're willing to learn. But people in general love learning and are curious. Like, the key to success is curiosity. And I think masterclass.com is the perfect model for online learning. I'm really happy they're sponsoring this episode. If you're going to give a gift, give the gift of learning. Masterclass makes a meaningful gift this season for you and anyone on your list, because both of you can learn from the best to become your best, from leadership to effective communication to cooking. Let me tell you some of the classes I've taken. I've taken comedy from Steve Martin. I mean, can you believe I can take a class from Steve Martin on comedy, or Judd Apatow, my favorite comedy director? I could take an actual class from him on writing. Wolfgang Puck on cooking. Dan Brown on writing, or Judy Bloom, who's been on this podcast, on writing. By the way, Wolfgang Puck also has been on this podcast. It's such a pleasure. I try to take classes all the time from masterclass.com. And whether you're watching Masterclass on TV or listening in audio mode in the app or on their site, the quality speaks for itself. It's like these Masterclass instructors are your own personal mentors that are going to help you reach the next level. How much would it cost to take one-on-one classes on comedy from Steve Martin or on chess from Gary Kasparov? You just wouldn't be able to do it. But it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. With a Masterclass annual membership, it's $10 a month. Memberships start at $120 a year for unlimited access to one-on-one classes with all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. So it's not just $120 for one instructor. You get all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. Boost your confidence and find practical takeaways you can apply to your life and at work. And if you own a business or are a team leader, use Masterclass to empower and create future-ready employees and leaders. That's the real education in today's world. So this holiday season, you can give one annual membership and get one free at masterclass.com/JAS. JAS, of course, stands for the James Altucher Show. So right now you can get two memberships for the price of one at masterclass.com/JAS. Masterclass.com/JAS. Offer terms apply. Now, is it a myth that solving puzzles or math problems or doing memory quizzes or Sudoku, is it a myth, or chess even, is it a myth that this helps the brain at all, or even as maintenance?
So learning new things is one of the best things you can do for your brain. We see this consistently in many studies. So the message is that we don't want people to think that as long as I do a crossword puzzle, I'm good. And I ignore everything else. In most cases, what we see, it's multiple factors. So it's a piece of the puzzle. It's one thing that's important to do. And so crossword puzzles, Sudoku, chess, anything that's mentally stimulating is really, really good for the brain and should be prioritized. It's just not the only thing that we should be doing. And the way I like to think about it is cross-training your brain. So if you go to the gym, you're not going to just, do bicep curls all day. Just like you shouldn't just do a mentally stimulating activity. Think about 3 areas that you want to work out your brain. One is the mentally stimulating, learning new things, playing chess, doing a crossword puzzle, taking a course in person or online. That's all excellent and should be prioritized, really important. New language, all that's great. But also think about doing something physical, like learning a new sport, yoga, dance. Balance is so important for our brain health. And as we get older, we can deprioritize like training our brain for balance, challenging it. And that's really important. It's a part of learning, but it's a physical learning. And the third thing is take some time during the week to be social. Like go out with a friend, get coffee, talk to people, because that's a part of learning that's a little bit different than the crossword puzzle and the physical. So just thinking about your week and being like, I just want to make sure I'm doing some things during the week where I'm doing something mentally stimulating that's new and different, something I don't do all the time. I also want to do something that's physical, that's new and different, that I'm learning a new physical skill. And then I want to make sure I'm socializing, once or twice during the week at least, because that's where we see it's that kind of cross training, and all these different aspects work out different parts of the brain. And that's what we want to be doing. We don't want to just be working out one part of the brain or 2 parts of the brain. We want to be working out, kind of getting a full brain workout.
So all this is great. And I do want to, I think there's some areas where I need to improve my brain health. I feel like I've been kind of naturally going in that direction over the years, but I could probably do a lot more. One thing, I want to get into some specifics. You mentioned how myelin are these sheaths that form around connections between neurons as people learn things. It's sort of like insulates the learning. And I know this is definitely a huge way kids, protect and learn things in a very deep way. And that as you get old, it used to be that they thought only kids could do this, but it turns out that later in life, you also could build this myelin and have this myelination around the connections between neurons. How old before that stops happening?
We see that it can slow down, but we see that people can have this process throughout their lifespan. I mean, there's not an end point. There's not a point where we would say, despite somebody having some significant underlying condition, that we can make the brain work better. Essentially, at any age, we can improve upon. It doesn't mean things aren't going to slow down in some areas, but by challenging our balance, by dancing, moving, playing sports, learning new things, we see myelination throughout the lifespan. So that's this idea that your brain stops changing after a certain age is a myth that we definitely want to dispel.
But will the myelination develop as quickly as it did back then when you were a kid, or are there ways to boost that? Is there some injection of myelin you could have so you have more myelin to put in your brain?
So in the developing brain time, which is from the time you're born to about 25, might be a little bit later for some individuals, but the idea is that's a very lots going on there. A lot of robust changes. The brain is under it's almost like you're remodeling a home, and it's just determining what your personality is going to be like, things that are just happening very quickly. It's not the same for the rest of our life, but there are things that we can do to keep the myelination process strong. When we sleep, that's important to preserve that process. A lot of that happens during sleep. So if we're not sleeping well, that process can be diminished. The other thing is things that we eat. So we see that the omega-3s are what the myelin is essentially made of. So as you said, we basically think of your brain cells like a wire, and you wrap the wire in a coating to keep the electrical signal propagating. Otherwise, it would just kind of fizzle and wouldn't get to the next brain cell. And so the omega-3s are like the salmon, avocados, the healthy fats. We actually can't make myelin on our own. We get it through the things that we eat. And that's why when people say salmon is brain food, that's really what they mean, is that the omega-3 that comes in the salmon, that is integral to the salmon, you digest it, send it up to your brain, wrap your brain cells with it. And if we're not taking it in, that can be cause deficiencies in that process.
So I eat a lot of salmon. Like that's probably the food I eat the most. I mean, in a sushi form, but I order from Grubhub or Uber Eats a lot. And I try to sleep 8 hours a day. I usually succeed at it. I try to move around, get sunlight, and so on. And I try to get out and stare into the horizon during the first 15 minutes after I wake up. So I try to do all these things, but I've definitely experienced some decline that I've noticed. Because I can measure it. I can measure what I was like when I was in my 20s, and I can measure what I'm like now, particularly on the chessboards. I could see the difference. So I definitely don't calculate as fast, for instance, and my memory is definitely not as good. So I'm wondering, A, what's going on, and B, is there more I can do to improve it?
So the things that you're doing are great. Think about, being aware of the underlying issues that are talked about in the book: heart health, gut health, metabolism. Any of those issues can have us diabetes, insulin resistance. These things are often overlooked, but they have a really powerful impact on the functioning of our brain. So in the book, I give that one piece of paper of the test to have in normal ranges, because we see if people keep those numbers in ranges, they really can optimize their brain health. Part of this is also, I'm a big baseball fan. I don't know if you're a baseball fan, but pitchers early in their career, they often rely on velocity, the speed at which they're throwing the ball. And as they get older, we see that they can be highly successful, into their 40s now, but they're not throwing velocity. They're using wisdom. They're using the skill of pitching, the craft, spinning the ball, placement. And it's very similar that we have to be aware that as we get older, there are some skills like, pure velocity, pure speed that might diminish. We'll do everything we can to preserve that. Just like a pitcher is going to try to stay in the best shape possible, stretch, do all those things to leverage. But as you mentioned with chess, and I know you know a lot more about chess than I do, much more, but the idea is that, we want to be thinking about, well, what are the things that I can leverage, that I can grow in skills and that I can use to my advantage that I didn't have earlier, and try to balance that so I can be, executing at the highest level possible for as long as possible. Being aware that there is a point, where velocity drops, calculation speed does drop. We do everything we can to keep it going, but try to leverage the things that we're learning in terms of experience, execution, and think about this in all facets of life. So we do see certain skills do increase as we get older. Our ability to make decisions, things like that can increase. So it might not be the speed of the decision, but the quality of the decision can be sometimes optimized.
I wonder how you can practice quality decision making. Like others, like other things you can practice. I could move around and play tennis or yoga or whatever. Or I could sleep 8 hours. I could eat these foods. How do you practice? And I could even practice calculating math problems or solving, doing memory quizzes. But how do you practice decision making?
Yeah, there's actually some really interesting research there, and some interesting take-home tips on that are, one is, when you're making the decision, our decision-making abilities are likely different at different times of the day. There's been all these really interesting studies with like judges, for example, that they make better decisions after they eat if they're not hungry. We're quick to make a worse decision if they're not sleep deprived. So just if you have to make a good decision, or if to make a decision that you want to be good, taking an assessment and saying, am I tired? Am I hungry? Because if those things are on the table, you might want to rectify those things first. Another thing to be aware of is, and I think what chess really teaches this, is looking at things from multiple angles and multiple decisions. Like I'm going to be making this decision, but how do I look at this from somebody else's perspective? Like, what is the other perspective on this? Another interesting insight that research has shown us about decision making is sometimes the time that we spend taking to make a decision will not impact the quality of the decision. They did these interesting studies with like generals who make decisions, and they found that if they spent a longer time making the decision, it didn't necessarily make them make a better decision. But what was really helpful was how they reacted to the outcome of that decision that they had just made. And so that realizing like you're not going to be perfect in all your decision making. There will be flaws, there's errors within, our decision making process. We can't know all the variables, but do your best to make a good decision, be well fed, get good sleep, try to look at it from multiple angles, try to not just look at it from your perspective, then make the decision and then say, okay, I've made the decision. How am I now going to make the next best decision based upon how that decision worked out? So, there's a whole area of interesting research there, but some things to think about and talk about.
It's interesting about the food thing. Like, I always wondered, if you just ate, wouldn't your blood be kind of working on and all your brain energy be working on digesting your food instead of helping you make decisions?
So the quality of what you're eating actually makes a difference. So they did this really interesting study where they had people eat essentially the same meal, and they had them take a test. It was about an hour later. So it is possible, like right after eating, you might want to be careful. But, thinking about timing about an hour later, they essentially ate the same meal, but one was prepared with more natural ingredients, and one was prepared with processed food ingredients. And the people who ate the natural food version of the meal performed better on the test an hour later. They brought everybody back a few months later. They switched the meal, and they found the same results again, even with the different group of people who had the ultra-processed meal. So there's a really powerful connection between what's happening in our gut. As we digest food, the food is broken apart and things are sent to the brain, not just nutrients, but certain foods that we eat cause inflammation that can be damaging to our brain function. So it is interesting to think about that the quality of the food that we're eating can impact our performance.
Now, even more specifically, I'm wondering about other types of hacks or whatever that people use. Like, for instance, I saw someone talking about something called alpha GPC the other day, like one of these nootropics that supposedly these supplements that enhance brain power.
Yeah, when we talk about those, it's the Wild West. There's no real strong research. Interestingly, the one that we have the most research with is caffeine. That's the one that actually has some evidence that it might improve memory. So like a cup of coffee or tea, right before you're about to do something, a memory task, might be improving for memory. But the other ones were still at the level of a lot of marketing, a lot of anecdotal evidence, a lot of, maybe small animal studies, but where we don't really see evidence that, there's a magic pill, that there's something that people can take that can, improve their mental performance beyond if they have some underlying condition, and that medication is going to be treating that condition and then improving their performance. But just for the general population, it's a big field, but it's very unregulated, very Wild West, and people need to be careful because, the last thing we want to do is hurting our brain because we hear that, the enticement of if I just take this thing, it's going to be improving my performance.
That's the interesting thing about caffeine. Like, I always thought caffeine was just suppressing the feelings of being tired, even if you are tired, so that it doesn't really help you. It just pretends to help you. So in general, I don't drink a lot of caffeine, but you're suggesting maybe a small amount might be okay for I didn't know the connection between caffeine and memory.
Yeah, there's some interesting studies there. It's not at the point where we would say that, people need to start drinking coffee or tea, but there is some evidence that if you drink coffee or tea, that there might be some benefits for anti-inflammatory. So we're thinking about caffeine in terms of, coffee or tea as opposed to like a soda. So for example, in coffee or tea, there's some anti-inflammatory, there's these like polyphenols that we believe are good for the brain. But the caffeine itself, there is some evidence that can be helpful in memory, in concentration and focus, as long as it's not too much. Too much caffeine, people get jittery, they have trouble calming down. And the only other issue is that caffeine can have a long half-life. So if anyone's having any trouble sleeping, be careful of having caffeine past like noon or 1. There's some people who can like down a cappuccino 5 minutes before bed and sleep just fine. They actually have different brain chemistry. They just metabolize caffeine differently. But there is some evidence that it's worth, next time you want to do a mental task, take a little bit of caffeine and see how it improves your ability to perform.
Yeah, there was a book by Sanjeev Chopra, who's a doctor he works at Harvard, is Deepak Chopra's brother, and he wrote a book about the 5 most nutritious foods. And I think, if I remember correctly, caffeine might have been number 1 for him because of he said there's a lot of antioxidants in a cup of coffee.
Yeah. So if you're enjoying your coffee or tea in the morning, there's some evidence there that it could be beneficial.
And okay, now getting really specific into hacks. In the book, you mentioned how there were these 2 mice. one was very adventurous, the other was not so adventurous and very shy, and they switched kind of gut bacteria because there's a lot
Yes.
of brain cells in the gut. There's a lot of communication between the gut and the brain, and the shy mouse became more adventurous, and the adventurous mouse became more shy. So why I understand there's been a lot of these types of tests on mice, and I know the reasons why. Why haven't they tried such an easy thing on humans? This seems like an easy test to do on humans.
Well, it's the way that they do those tests with the mice in terms of switching bacteria. The mice have to be raised in a certain environment. It's called germ-free, and it's just not feasible with humans to have them born into that environment and then raise them that way. But what we do see is evidence that individuals who have certain conditions that you wouldn't think are related to the gut, anxiety, depression, Parkinson's, we're seeing with Alzheimer's as well, that there's a component of gut health there. And so, there again, people quickly jump to the marketing that, everybody should be taking probiotics, and that means we should just be taking supplements to change our gut bacteria. Well, we see that for the vast majority of the population, that doesn't seem to do much of a benefit. But what you eat, and when we go back to that study about the food that is processed versus not processed, that fundamentally changes the gut bacteria.
But what if I just take the gut bacteria of a 20-year-old and put it in my gut,
And transplant it?
Yeah, I admit there's problems. It's not germ-free and all that, but it's better than it's better than nothing.
So this idea of bacterial transplants it's out there, and it's on the. I mean, what I mean by out there is it's being done. It's on the horizon, and here's the problem: is that I'll tell you the pros and the cons. The hope of this is that it will be figured out in a way that it will make a difference. Right now, what happens is that you already have so much bacteria, trillions of bacteria cells in your gut, and so what happens is that when you try to introduce just a new type of bacteria in the gut, it's like a squirt gun in the ocean. It's hard to make a difference in terms of the transplant unless somebody has, some significant underlying condition where there's something completely out of balance and we can try to push things in the other direction. So the changes that we see that are more beneficial now are with food, because the bacteria eat food, and if certain types of bacteria, you feed them, and these certain types of bacteria grow if they're fed, and if other bacteria are starved, they die. So it's not an overnight process, but it takes time. But this idea of transplantation of bacteria, it's something to keep our eye on because it's part of the process. And if something like this, down the road can be optimized, even for certain people with certain conditions, there's some hope there. It's just we're not just there yet. We're not ready to do things like this, commercially. There are people that, you can find things online, but be very careful of those things.
Like, have there been any studies with humans at all, or have there been any odd anecdotal successes?
Yeah, so there is, not to get, these studies get a little gross because of what we're talking about, but there's a condition called C. diff, which is individuals often catch this in the hospital, and it's a very dangerous form of bacteria that grows in the intestine, in the large intestine, and it's very hard to treat. They try to treat it with antibiotics, and it just comes back, and it's very, very challenging. So what they've done in some studies is they do a fecal transplant, and they basically take, because feces is filled with bacteria, so they take from a healthy person and they transplant it in to the person who's suffering from C. diff. And by doing that transplant, they've actually seen some benefit where people do better than being treated with antibiotics. So that's where we see the most evidence in what we would call like a bacteria transplant. But that's in a case where somebody is suffering from something like C. diff. There are biotech companies that have popped up and said, well, instead of doing it as a fecal transplant, let's see if we can put this in a pill. And those have not been as successful. So there is something synergistically happening amongst all these different types of bacteria that we don't quite understand yet, and how to get the right combination to people. And so instead, where we see that's one example of success in a very specific situation.
Oh my gosh, I love these clothes. Mizzen and Main. That's Mizzen and Main. It really is the most comfortable work clothes. Travel clothes. I had to travel this whole week. I'm traveling for a week and a half, and I just took Mizzen and Main clothes with me. Close out 2023 in style with comfortable, breathable, packable, and machine washable pieces from Mizzen and Main. As you wrap up your year-end goals, enjoy a Mizzen and Main dress shirt that you can wear confidently. I like that they've very, very just nice, solid colors. I don't really like to get all fancy in patterns and everything, although they do have some pattern shirts, but very comfortable clothes, stretchable pants. It's just super comfortable, but they look professional and you can wear them casually or professionally. I like some of their flannel shirts or untuck shirts. I love untuck. I never tuck in. So again, whether you're shopping for a special someone or giving yourself the gift you really want, I just buy myself gifts. Mizzen and Main is the perfect gift for any guy who works, travels, and or cares about looking and feeling great. As you could tell by my many photos across the internet, I care about looking fantastic. I'm practically a model. And let's be honest, every guy loves to look great. So again, shop now at mizzenandmain.com and save 20% when you spend $130 or more using promo code James. That's promo code James at Mizzen and Main, Mizzen and Main.com. This is such a valuable service for all business owners, big businesses, small businesses, doesn't matter. I wish I had this in the many different businesses that I've started. Sometimes it seems like your business is humming, but then suddenly you don't understand it. You're starting to fall behind. You're not understanding where your costs are, where your revenues are, where your payments are. Teams are buried in all sorts of like BS work, and you can't seem to close the books. So you need like one dashboard, one source of truth. I'm jealous of this business, NetSuite from Oracle, of course, NetSuite by Oracle. I wish I'd come up with this idea. It's a brilliant concept to have all your business intelligence on one dashboard. This is why you need to know these three numbers: 37,000, 25, and 1. So 37,000, that's the number of businesses which have upgraded to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system, streamlining accounting, financial management, inventory, HR, and more. 25. NetSuite turns 25 this year. That's 25 years of helping businesses do more with less, close their books in days, not weeks, and drive down costs. 1, because your business is one of a kind. So you get a customized solution for all of your key performance indicators, your KPIs, in one efficient system with one source of truth. Manage risk, get reliable forecasts, and improve margins. Everything you need to grow all in one place. So right now, download NetSuite's popular KPI checklist designed to give you consistently excellent performance absolutely free at netsuite.com/James. That's netsuite.com/James to get your own KPI checklist. netsuite.com/James. Now, in the book, you mentioned different types of memory. Like there's kind of focus memory where something's happening right in front of you. There's short-term memory. There's long-term memory. And kind of in the middle of I guess, short-term memory, there's working memory. Uh,
Yeah.
and I'm wondering if one problem as you get older is that your working memory, your ability to kind of um, like for instance, I used to be a computer programmer, and when you're a computer programmer,
Yeah.
you have to kind of keep track of all the code in your head simultaneously. So if something goes wrong, you can make an accurate guess. Oh, it's from this part of the code because it's interacting in this way, and so on. So working memory is very critical for these types
Yeah.
of calculations. I'm wondering if there's a way to again, outside of the lifestyle changes, I wonder if there's a way to make working memory a little bigger, or maybe that shrinks as you get older.
Yeah, so working memory, the way you described it is correct. And one way to think about it is like scratch pad memory. Like it's the things you would write down on a scratch pad as you're like trying to take notes about something you're doing, but you're holding it in your head. And as we get older, this is a part of memory that can diminish. It can be much more challenging to kind of keep hold information. But by practicing that, so as we get older, and especially in our modern world where we have to do this less and less, so much of the information that we want to remember is at our fingertips in terms of Googling it. It's in our phone. So actually just practicing this type of memory has been shown to be effective. So like just saying to yourself, I'm going to set aside some time during the day and I'm going to practice trying to keep track of a calculation in my head. I'm going to do some math. I'm going to remember, try to memorize some phone numbers. I mean, it's so hard now to memorize a phone number. It's because this part of our brain has atrophied in our modern world,
Right.
Because we don't have to do it. So, these skills are an element of this is that they're use it or lose it. And if we don't practice these skills, they do diminish. It can get harder as we get older. But oftentimes as we get older, we're not doing these things as much as we were when we were younger.
I mean, I guess in a lot of my activities in life, I have to have a big working memory. Like even this podcast, I had to not only read your book, but understand what questions I wanted to ask, remember them, so I'm not referring to notes or whatever. And similarly, like in chess, when you're making a decision, you're calculating all these lines. You have to remember before you make the decision what lines you calculated, what was good and what was bad. I'm wondering if so in other words, I practice this a lot, but I wonder if it's just maintenance because I'm no longer able to improve it because of my age, whereas kids are able to improve it when they practice it.
Let me give you a compliment. It's amazing what I've done quite a few interviews, and the fact that you read the book, you're not using notes, and you are discussing it, it's amazing. Like what you're doing is amazing. So
thank you.
Like thinking of all the things that you might be concerned about, like what you're doing is incredible. So it's not easy to do that. So thinking about if you're seeing areas where you're like, I want to improve upon that, trying to get kind of granular in what that is and saying like, it's kind of like if you're exercising and you're going to the gym and, you can generally improve things, but if you get down to like, what is the exact thing that I want to be working on, that I want to be improving, and sort of saying like, okay, what is that skill? Is it the idea of specifically tracking information in my brain? Am I losing information somewhere along the way? Is that the concern, or is it just in general the speed of the information that I'm able to calculate? Am I losing my train of thought along the way? And trying to figure out which of those things someone is having difficulty, and then trying to assess, specific exercises that can be done for those things. But also there's that layer, and then there's the layer of the sleep, the underlying issues, the diet, all those things come into play because the health of the brain causes those areas to be at their best. And as we get older, those things can slip in areas here and there. So it's kind of the balance of those two aspects.
But I wonder if the age-related aspect decreases, like let's say the working memory or the calculation speed so much that the best you could hope for with all of these things is maintenance, which is good, which is fine. Like that's, wards off dementia and Alzheimer's and so on potentially. But I wonder if there's a way to keep improving even as you age, but maybe it's just not.
Well, I can. There's these tests that they did in Finland, and they did these interventions that we're talking about, these lifestyle interventions, and people improved. They didn't just maintain. They saw improvements they gave them tests. Big group of people, they looked at thousands of people. Half the people did the intervention, half the people didn't. The people who did their intervention, their test scores went up significantly. Their, executive functioning went up significantly, and the processing speed of their brain went up significantly. So we do see, it's not just about maintenance. We do see evidence that things can be improved upon throughout the lifespan.
And then there's another factor which is sort of related to age, but not biologically, more environmentally. Like, as opposed to when I was younger, now I have kids, career issues, I deal with lots of different people more than when I was a kid or younger. And I wonder if that has a role as well. But then again, when I was younger, I also was less equipped to handle, multiple things going on in my life.
Yeah, it's definitely, there's pros and cons to both. So on one hand, as we get older, we gain the ability to manage our emotions better, but we have more oftentimes responsibilities. Not in all cases, but in many cases. And so there's a lot of multitasking going around. And so something I do talk about in the book that can be helpful to what we've been discussing here is that the 10 seconds, if you had a chance to see that part, that it sounds so...
The 7-second rule, right?
Yeah, 7 to 10 seconds.
Yeah.
And so this idea that, sometimes I say give it an extra 3 seconds, make it 10 seconds. And so the idea is that, we are multitasking a lot, and we're also moving on to things very quickly. And so the part of your brain that's sort of holding information in the waiting room, it's called the hippocampus, it doesn't really want to remember things. Like, there's all this filtering that goes on in the brain, and the hippocampus coordinates a lot of our memory functions. So working memory, short-term memory, recall. It's like Grand Central Station and kind of the waiting room of memory. And so if you want to remember something, it's so remarkably simple. But if we just think about our modern world, where we're often not spending 2 seconds figuring out or remembering where we parked our car, put our keys, we're just on to the next, on to the next, on to the next. It's just, when you want to remember something, saying to yourself, I'm just going to focus on this and nothing but this for an uninterrupted 7 to 10 seconds, because that allows that part of the brain to say, oh, this information is important. It transfers it to other parts of the brain where it's going to be remembered, as opposed to just throwing it away, because the brain is constantly trying to filter things out. And in our constant multitasking states, or a constant state of distraction or overwhelm, or tiredness, or just moving on to things that we need to move on to quickly, our brain is often thinking, oh, this stuff is not probably that important for a long term. Let's just throw it away, throw it away, throw it away, throw it away. And so that simple tip can be very effective, especially as we get older.
What do you think is the effect of social media on memory and calculation? Because, when you let's say you spend an hour or two scrolling through your Facebook feed or Twitter feed or whatever,
Yeah.
You're taking in all this information that is the brain has to go into overdrive filtering things, because it's almost all useless.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So social media it's not all good and it's not all bad. On one level, the things that we're concerned about with social media are that it's highly, highly difficult to put it down. And, brain scientists have been hired to make this content tap into parts of our brain that make it so that we just can't put it away. I mean, even, when we're streaming things on TV nowadays, the next episode starts before the last episode ends. It's all about keeping you engaged, keeping you in this loop of constantly clicking the next thing, or on to the next, on to the next, on to the next. That can keep us from sleeping. That can keep us from going outside. It can keep us from connecting with people in a much more probably meaningful way. And those are the concerns. It also can keep us from doing other activities that are good for our brain. But there's elements of social media that can be positive. It can connect us. We can learn new things. It can be relaxing in some cases. So the idea is that it's a balance. Social media can be good, but we want to keep it to doses and be highly aware that it's hard to keep it to doses. So sometimes we have to take, strong action to say, I'm going to turn this off, put it in a drawer, and set a boundary on this, because I know that if I don't, I'm going to be constantly checking it. And I talk in the book about these studies where even if your phone is off and in front of you, people score less on tests than if it's in another room, because your brain is seeing the phone and thinking, what am I missing? What am I missing? What am I missing? And these things like micro distraction, or your brain thinking about things that are just in your visual field that you would think, oh, I'm not thinking about that. It is disrupting your ability to, think at optimal levels.
And I'm wondering, is there, let's say you're making a decision and you're thinking very hard about it, you're concentrating, and then is there any benefit to looking away? Like you said, when you look at things from multiple angles, sometimes that's helpful, but is there any benefit, for instance, to getting up and looking away as opposed to constantly churning on one problem?
Yeah, absolutely. So your brain works on things in the background. There's your conscious level of thought, and then there is your ability of your brain to sort of work on things in the background. And so there's these interesting studies, and I touch upon them in the book, about kind of this formula that people use who tend to really rise to the top of their field. And what they tend to do is they tend to focus without distraction. They put the phone away and they lock into what they need to be doing for, a certain time during the day. It could be 20 minutes, could be 30 minutes, could be 40 minutes. But at the end of that time period, they take a break. They go for a walk, they go for a swim. They do something else, because that ability to move on to something more mindless or more fun allows the brain to play with the information and look at it from multiple perspectives and multiple angles. So that's why dreams are so great, is because it's one of the only time during our day where our brain takes a break of thinking about things in a very structured manner. So this idea of this dual benefit, or this ability of the brain to say, okay, I'm really going to focus on this, but then I'm going to take a break. A lot of our best ideas or breakthroughs or creative thought don't happen in the moment of the intense focus. They often come on the walk, or a little bit later while you're taking a swim or working out or doing something else. You just wake up. And that's because it's kind of like in the moment that you're focusing on it, you plant the seed, but you allow it to bloom later when you're just kind of letting your brain work on it in the background. It sounds so simple, but we oftentimes get stuck in this pattern of thinking where you're doing work, but you're checking a sports score, or you're checking a vacation website, or you're taking your break, but you're still answering a work email. And just separating out the boundaries and saying nothing but focus, nothing but break. Back to nothing but focus, back to nothing but break, seems to be not only lessening burnout, but it also gets us off, the hamster wheel, and allows us to use our brain in ways where we're just kind of getting the best of its ability, as opposed to just sort of balancing things, multitasking all day long. Nothing wrong with multitasking. Just we want to make sure some part of the day is more structured in these two ways of thinking.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned how musicians often have these insights of creativity in the shower. The shower seems to be like the classic place, because I guess that's like a forced break, and there's it's not like you're on your phone in the shower. There's nothing there.
Right.
It's all interesting stuff. I mean, it's definitely an area of research where it's like critically important, not only for people who are at risk of dementia or Alzheimer's, but just as we get older and want to maintain relevance in the things we love doing. This is all important stuff, and we need to pay attention to it. So Dr. Marc Milstein, author of The Age-Proof Brain, and also your website, yourpersonalbraincoach.com. I highly recommend people check that site out as well. Thank you so much for giving me so much useful information, which I'm definitely I'm gonna have salmon every night this week before my tournament this weekend. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me on. It was really just so great to be here.
Thank you. If you like that episode, please subscribe to me wherever you get podcasts, because it helps my podcast stay alive and well, and I want you to subscribe. Please do it. Thank you so much.
Finding the music you love shouldn't be hard. That's why Pandora makes it easy to explore all your favorites and discover new artists and genres you'll love. Enjoy a personalized listening experience simply by selecting any song or album, and we'll make a station crafted just for you. Best of all, you can listen for free. Download Pandora on the Apple App Store or Google Play and start hearing the soundtrack to your life.
Welcome back to our studio, where we have a special guest with us today, Toucan Sam from Fruit Loops. Toucan Sam, welcome.
It's my pleasure to be here. Oh, and it's Fruit Loops, just so you know.
Fruit?
Fruit.
Yeah, fruit.
No, it's Fruit Loops. The same way you say studio.
That's not how we say it.
Fruit Loops, find the loopy side.